Hi, Londell. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's truly a treat. You and I got to meet and chat a little bit beforehand, and your story, just from having met you before, was so intriguing. But then on top of that, I have since received and read your book. There's so much here that I think readers could relate to, could be interested in just as you as a person. But I think what you've captured in your experiences and the message that you're trying to bring to readers points to the complexity of what it is to be a human. First of all, like not even beginning to dive into all of the various identities that we have. So before we get into some of these experiences that you've shared in your book and all of that complexity, I always like to invite my guests to share a little something about themselves that wouldn't typically be in a bio, or something that's fun and interesting about you, a surprising fact.
I think uh, w- one of my favorite hobbies is movie watching. And I think what might be most surprising, maybe not, is the genre that I choose to enjoy, which is typically horror movies. I think I was exposed to them at a very impressionable age and have grown with them ever since. But it allows me to escape to some degree some reality. And then it's kind of like riding a roller coaster, that first drop, the anticipation of going up the hill, and then that first drop coming down, and then just the invigorating ride that comes along with it is, I find that very intriguing and entertaining through my watching of various horror movies, both some classics, which come to mind are Halloween and Carrie and Friday the 13th, but there's also some that are a little bit more intellectual, like The Barbarian, that one came out, I think just a few years ago or something. But that's a little something about me that I don't think you'll find in a bio. And I don't write it out a lot, and because people then turn their heads and like, why do you like horror? And it's a whole other discussion among itself.
Well, honestly, it makes me smile because I was just making the comment recently to somebody that I've noticed in the past, you would see lots of trailers and ads for movies coming out in the theater that would be horror films. September, October is when they're
Mhm.
usually out. These days, it's all year round. As a matter of fact, you know how like people do like companies and businesses will do like Christmas in July. I just saw recently something about 6 months until Halloween. Like people are counting down until Halloween, and I'm like, what? I didn't know that was a thing. I just, I couldn't ever get into it. I'm too much of a scaredy cat. And there is a TV show, I forget which platform it's on right now, but it's so popular, Yellow Jackets. And
Yes,
I keep wanting to watch. My husband's like, "Do you want to try to start Yellow Jackets?" I'm like, I don't know, man, because I don't know if I can handle it." Like, there's just things. And Jordan Peele right now, like his movies, I love them for different reasons, but I'm always like, "Can I do it? I don't know." I'm just such a chicken because you know why? I have to like watch cartoons or something like I'm six
yeah,
afterwards. Like I have to cleanse whatever the palate is for the brain or memory so that I can sleep.
certainly.
But I don't think you're alone, Londell. People are into horror films these days.
Yeah. And I would suggest, I think you can give Yellow Jackets a try. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And I think it'd be great just to learn more about you in general. This show really focuses on what it is to be a person that doesn't fit neatly into some social box, right? Like
Yeah,
society loves to do that to us because we're human and humans love to categorize because it makes us feel safe to know that a label is on something, whether we're placing a label on ourselves or on others. But, we don't always have a neat label for ourselves or for groups. Do you have some experiences that you could share when it comes to belonging or not fitting into a given social box?
oh, most definitely. I think being a multiracial individual, I kind of grew up that way. I grew up that way. Um, never being enough for one side, never being enough for another side, and then really just trying to figure out, well, what does enough mean? And so I've spent the most recent years of my life. I'm over 50 now, and so I did some discovering of who I am and what it means to be me, and really being able to think about, like, for me, a big one was masculinity. What does masculinity mean to me? I'm a same gender loving Black male, Afro Latino. But growing up, particularly in my late teens and early 20s, really got the message that because of who it is I chose to love, that I was never masculine enough, or masculinity was just these types of characteristics. And at that point, I really never saw those characteristics within myself. Over the years, I've really done some personal work to really realize that, just like many other things, I have the prerogative of choosing what does masculinity mean to me. And so it may be one thing for myself where it's not another thing for another person. There's so many different ways in which I can define myself and I can show up and I can just appear, and really being able to straddle these lines of, um, you know, the hard line of you have to be one thing, you have to do another thing, you have to act a certain way, you have to speak a certain way. Um, that's really been my maturation process. And so it's something that I continue to work on, something that I think a lot of individuals in general, I judge, that want to find exactly how do they show up in life, and is the way that they're showing up in life, is that really genuine for themselves? And is it not something that's really um, something that they're inheriting from somebody else, whether that's parents, family, friends, the society at large? But really speaking to themselves and saying, I am a genuine person, and this is how I choose to show up in the world, and really honoring that with them, with themselves.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I often use gender as an example when trying to help folks understand why people who are mixed race or multi-ethnic or multiracial, in whichever way that they are. For example, like I'm a multi-generational mixed person, which
Hmm.
means I don't have parents of two different races. My quote mix comes so much further back in my ancestry, but it still has made me a racially ambiguous looking person, right?
Hmm.
And so trying to understand what that is, if you aren't a person that holds a mixed race identity in some form, can be kind of boggling. And I think about gender, it's kind of the same way because both are social constructions. Like, who decided what blackness is? Who
Yeah.
decided what it is to be Latino or Latina? Like, it comes from a label that people who don't look like us made. Right? They're the ones that
Definitely.
decided what that is. So
Hmm.
don't we get to decide what that feels like? And I feel like that's much the same for gender. Back in the day, y'all, I used to teach elementary school, and I had a third grade class. And this one year, I had this little boy named Carrie, and Carrie wore pink every single day. And at the beginning of the school year, the boys mostly teased him. Carrie rolled in with his big fro and his pink polo, his pink t-shirt, his pink whatever, his pink shoes. And he was just like, why can't my favorite color be pink? I like
Yeah.
pink. You like red. You like blue. And I was like, okay, well, 8 year old, like he knew who he was at 8, which brings me to the second point. You started to sort of touch on authenticity, right? Like
Hmm.
being who you truly are. Look, y'all, if an 8 year old can be authentic to himself and show up in school with his pink, whatever he wanted, because that was his favorite color, because who said pink was for a girl or for a boy or whatever? It's just a color.
Yeah.
And he can be himself authentically, then so can we, if we are brave enough to do so. And that brings me to the third thing, the narratives that we have inherited and that we adopt for ourselves, right? I'm a coach too. So I always, think about what tape is playing in our heads.
Hmm.
What's our playlist look like? Or if you're from my generation, what's that mixtape look like? you know, like what do you have? that are your standbys, your favorites that just are on repeat, whether you want them to be there or not. It's usually some message that we've received about what it is to be a certain thing or certain way and how we're expected to live that out. And when can we decide to make a new playlist? And how hard is that to do?
Yeah, those messages oftentimes they're oftentimes verbal messages. Well, I shouldn't say just verbal messages. They're messages that are outwardly spoken, they're displayed, but they're also through that also display, they're messages that are entered into our subconscious,
Hmm.
and that aren't direct. Like you can't wear pink because that's not what boys do. It's more of watching someone who else is being picked on because they're a boy that's wearing pink, and
Hmm.
then you inherit that and say, well, that must not be something that I should be doing, that I should do, because it's not. I see what's happening to that person, and I don't want that same thing to happen to me. And unfortunately, there's so many instances where we do get those unspoken messages, those um, that just tell us that we don't have the right to be who we are, and if we try to, albeit it's somewhat true, it can be very difficult to be your true self, to be your authentic self, because of we're fighting so many different battles to exhibit those that realness, that who we choose to be and who we want to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then layer on top of that, not just the messages about one aspect of your identity, but then if you have different aspects of your identity that overlap, that would normally be some sort of barrier where it's like, bam, you get it this way because this is this part of your identity. And then on this side, it's like this. And then it's like, how do you deal with all of that? And I know, you mentioned a couple of things about yourself, being a mixed race individual and not just a mixed race individual, but a person being same gender loving. All of that together is just like when you go to the eye doctor and they put the thing on you, right? So imagine you've got that little mask thing and they're like, okay, everything's blurry, right? And you're like, yep. And they go, which one's better, one or two? And they flip the
Yeah.
little thing, right? So
Mhm.
every time they flip that little thing, it's like another lens. And so, what does it take to see through all of those identities to a point of clarity versus are you making it worse for yourself or for somebody else as you continue instead of adding clarity with each lens? There's these barriers you're adding each time, right? So not only are we fighting these narratives, but we've got people walking around here with all kinds of jacked up lenses. Some got clear lenses, some, and you're like, y'all, when it comes down to it, take this mask off and I'm just a human. But they've
Yeah,
got whatever tape they're playing.
yeah. And I think I couldn't think of a more appropriate analogy than what you just used. Because not only are we searching to find those lenses that allow us to see clearly, not necessarily on what's in front of us, but see clearly ourselves and live in an authentic space. Just like glasses, we should always be, I judge that we should always be looking at redefining and refocusing that. So just like I get an annual eye exam, I need to look at, you know, yeah, I can't see a foot away further now. And so as it relates to myself, am I really living into my authentic human in my authenticity? Am I really living to what I said I was going to do? And sometimes, along that year's road, I've done something to cloud my vision, or I've done something or learned something else that sharpens my vision. And I think that's really a good example of how we continue to remold ourselves and become that really authentic person, because it's not just this end destination. I judge that it's not an end destination. I judge
Agreed.
that it is a voyage, and that it is a journey that can be spectacular and can be like a horror film at the same time. Not to say that our horror films are spectacular.
Don't you think sometimes people willfully take off the glasses too?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
let's say you've gotten some clarity, but then what you see is scary.
Hmm.
Whether that means it's scary because it makes you face some reality or because it challenges a way of thinking. So I think some people are willful when they decide not to see a person for
Yeah.
who they are.
Yeah.
And I agree so much that it is a journey. It is, I say that all the time, honestly. Like, identity journeys don't really end until, until it's over. Then,
Yeah,
then you're not thinking about it anymore. But uh, also because who we are as humans, like we continue to adapt and evolve. We're always introduced to some new information, right? Data inputs all
yeah,
the time. And that can change your viewpoint or um, your approach. And sometimes you don't want to deal with it. So you take the glasses off. And other times you dial in a little bit more. I did want to ask you about something that I
yeah,
saw in your book. I think a lot of folks, when they think about mixedness, so to speak, they only think black and white most of the time.
yeah,
You also earlier talked about this idea of being enough, which comes up a lot. You said, over the years, I've grown to accept I'm not enough of one tribe to be fully accepted by any tribe. I've been told I act too white to be black and too black to be Mexican.
yeah.
Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Certainly. Growing up in Denver, one might make the assumption that, particularly in Denver proper, that there isn't a large community of Black people. There just isn't. Um, Not like I've experienced in Atlanta or in Chicago or other large cities. So, just as some context in comparison. So, I grew up in a majority white neighborhood. Not to say that there weren't any other people that looked like me that went to school, because there surely were. Now, because of how I was raised in my mother's family, which was Latino. Um, and it was this weird phenomenon. Um, she was raised in the 50s with her and her siblings. And in that time, because of the way they looked, they passed. And that was a point for them to pass. By what I mean by that is by looking white or not looking like a person of color.
Mhm.
And so as I grew up and grew into myself, there were many microaggressions that happened in my upbringing, which corrected the way I speak, which corrected the way I talk or how I move around, how I interact with others. And so I was not one to pick up any sort of vernacular of any sort. I was just this nerd that was in school, and I loved that part of myself. But I found that because of how I found myself in school, and particularly, and speaking a certain way, whatever that way is, that it just wasn't enough. I was told that I was pretending that I was white because
Mhm.
of my experiences, because of how I sounded, because of how I interacted with others. I was told that I was just never going to be accepted into this community because of my feminine nature at that point. Um, but there were things that, I really needed to say in my adult life that um, this is okay. No, and actually, let me go back to a piece of going to college. I went to Morehouse College, which is a predominantly all black, all male school in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's probably where I've faced this phenomena the most, which, men would come up to me from all walks of life and ask, so what are you? Where are you from? Who are you? And I really didn't know how to respond to that question because I'm me.
Correct, right.
So it's really difficult to explain for me who I was and who I am at some days. Some days I want to be a smart aleck and I want to say, well, be smart mouthed and say something typically rude and passive aggressive. And other days I feel like I want to be instructional and educational and let people know exactly where I come from, meaning what is my ancestry? What is my education? What is my background? But as I get older, I find myself not wanting to be as educational as I used to be because it's just like I've had enough.
Yeah.
And then likewise, on the opposite side is my Mexican relatives. I don't speak a lick of Spanish other than kind of what I learned in middle school and high school. Um, I have relatives that will deliberately speak in Spanish while I'm around because that's their way of excluding me from being a part of them.
Like intentionally.
Oh, definitely intentionally, yes. Um, and sometimes it hurts, and sometimes I have to come to the realization, or have come to the realization that this is not about me, this is about them. It, have the same grandparents that they have. I have some of the same similar experiences that they have, but I'm just not enough. I may be too dark for them. I may be too whatever for them. But it really now isn't necessarily part of, I'm not trying to find a way to describe to them or to beg them or to ask for them to let me into their life. So at this point in my life, it's really about, it's a pleasure to know who I am. It's a pleasure to know me. And, if you want to be a part of that, let's jive together. Otherwise, you know, you can do what you need to do and I'll continue doing what I've been doing.
I think that is really profound, and it takes a long time to get to that point to love yourself and respect yourself enough to feel like you don't have to answer to anybody because you, as you are, that's enough. But when you go most of your life with people questioning your ancestry and why it even matters, like why it's so important to them,
Yeah.
I don't know. I get excited when somebody sees me as a Black person.
No, I can appreciate what you're saying completely. When I was younger, I would not want people to see that I was mixed. I just want them to see me as a Black person because that's just how I grew up. That's how I was socialized. Now, I want to be seen not just as that Black person. I want to be seen as this combination. So I bond with you on that desire to just be proud and saying someone sees me for who I am and not what they want to necessarily project on me. And so I'm totally there with you on that one.
I'm glad because I do feel kind of silly about it, but I can't help it. I
No,
just, I don't
it's
know.
a
I
real
think
thing.
because I've had to explain. Like I
Yeah.
always, and I say had to. Nobody has to, but it just feels like I'm compelled to explain.
Yeah, they ask you, they look at you and so what are you? And you're like, oh, here we go again.
Yes,
And then it doesn't even have to be a verbal explanation or question. It's just that look that someone gets as they try to figure out. They run through all these
the dance of
stereotypical
questions.
images. Yes. And it is what it is for them, but I get it totally.
Where are you from? So tell me about your family. They know better now than to
Yeah.
just be like, "What are you?" But boy, the dance they do to try to get to the answer is hilarious sometimes. It's a little entertaining. I'm not even gonna lie. Sometimes I just let them do it.
I enjoyed on vacation. Sometimes I can be just about any person I want to be on, depending upon where I am.
That is true for people who are racially ambiguous. And I think that people who are in the acting business who are racially ambiguous,
Hmm.
like they probably open up so many roles for themselves. I find myself even fascinated when I see somebody like that. Like I want to know, I do my studies on mixed race experiences. So I am always curious of examples of people. But at the same time, I totally get why people want to know because sometimes I even want to know. And sometimes it's because I feel represented in media, like when there's somebody who's not quite whatever, you know?
Yeah.
I used to get so mad at Mariah Carey because when I was younger, before she was Mimi, um, people used to always say that I looked like her. And I'd say, well, Uh, probably because we're both light skinned or whatever.
Mhm.
But she would never in any interview say that she was mixed. Like it was just always such a mystery. And then finally in later years, she shared more about her ancestry and stuff. And it was like these days, I feel like people are less surprised. They might still be intrigued, but the population of mixed folks has grown and continues to grow so much that it's more normalized. You're less of a novelty and some exotic figure. But it was so funny. I used to get so frustrated. Like, why will she not say it? And when Meghan Markle
Oh,
married
yes.
Prince Harry, my face was so glued to that television. I was just so happy to see the representation and the openness of it. Like it didn't have to be some weird, mysterious secret because of the anti-miscegenation laws. Like just being a mixed person was
Hmm.
bad. I've been called a mulatto grown up. I've been called
Oof.
a half breed, all kinds of things. And it's like, so I could get why people keep it sort of to themselves, but I also crave the examples and the representation.
Yeah, that's what I was going to chime in about. That there's a lot back then. I too am Gen Xer, and kind of going back to what my family experienced. I mean, it was not safe really to invite yourself into the criticism of being an individual of mixed heritage or mixed race, um, because you were in essence then inviting the questions, you were inviting the speculation, you were inviting a lot of negativity into your life uh, by acknowledging that, yeah, my ancestry, my parents, my whomever, they're of different races, um, or different ethnicities, and yeah, so I totally get, why someone like Mariah Carey, or even still, I'm not huge on star names, but I'm pretty sure there's many other people in the public eye who they're not ashamed of it, but they don't make it a point to bring it up.
One of the things I love to offer listeners is like stuff they can take away and apply to their lives, actually, no matter what their identities are.
Mhm.
And there's a thing that you said um, about curiosity, vulnerability, and empathy being keys to helping people come together. And I think at a time like now, y'all, just to be straight, there is, and I don't want to even say a lot of division anymore. I know a lot of people say there's a lot of division and we're all, I think people are a little lost right now, specifically in the
Mhm.
US. And that might have led to some division because we all want to belong. We all want to feel seen and understood in some way. And politically speaking, socially speaking, it's hard to be on the same page because we quite literally are on a million different digital pages.
Yeah.
Look, back in the day, we had like three channels, y'all. We were just talking about this, my husband and I, because I was like, "Do you remember Video Jukebox?" And he was
Oh,
like,
yes.
"No, see, you remember." He didn't remember it. And I was like, "Yeah, it was like on one of them UHF, like, okay, that
Yes.
sound, you guys, because nobody knows what that was. Let me just explain
That's
that
great.
that sound is me turning the dial on the UHF dial because there was like 5011 like of
Yes.
those. It would be like listening to AM radio, okay?
Yeah.
But on the VHF dial, there was like four clicks, click, 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 click. Okay,
Hmm.
okay. So back in the day, everybody sat down and watched evening news. Then there were folks who had their daily newspaper, could have been a national paper or their local paper.
Right.
This is before we had anything even resembling the computers we carry on our pockets now. Okay. So the conversations that you might have about society, about even pop culture or politics, you all are coming from basically four or five sources because everybody saw the same information.
Hmm.
And then we had to use our own critical thinking skills and apply our own values and belief systems to decide how we felt about what was reported. These days, you've got algorithms working overtime to keep feeding you more and more of whatever it is you like or share or
Yeah.
forward or whatever that is. And so then when we come to the table to discuss what's going on, we've got so many different sources. It's hard. But
Yeah.
one of the things that you talked about in your book was how can we, instead of being ready to come at people for their differences of opinion or whatever, how can we come with curiosity? How can we show a little bit of vulnerability? And how can we apply some empathy?
Yeah. 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 I was thinking about this topic earlier. We live in a space of noise right now, sheer noise, and we pick and choose what frequency of that noise we're going to listen to to your point, this moment, this hour, this next 3 or 4 days, and then we change it up as much as we can, or much as we desire to. But it's still a lot of noise. It's a lot of noise from one end of one opinion to another end of another opinion. It's like a popularity contest. It's not,
It is, isn't it? Like actually,
yeah,
quite literally, how many likes and follows? It's quantifiable.
yes. And so it's the popularity contest of noise and who can be loudest and who can be most egregious and sometimes. And it's not coming from a place of curiosity. And so what I mean by curiosity is, I can be judgmental just as anybody else can. I, and through my growth, there's been a level of maturation that I've still am going through. That is about looking at someone and instead of immediately seeing that person and making the judgments about that person, when I think about that person, when I believe that person, which are, you know, based on just my mere looking at them or hearing them for 3 or 4 seconds, um, that I take the opportunity to think about, well, where are these judgments coming from? What is it that is um, getting me riled up, or what is it that's triggering this emotion? And that's this curiosity. It's the what, not the why, but the what. Why or what is it that's happened to me in my lifetime, which I may have experienced this emotion, or maybe have experienced this thought, or what have you. And then approaching the situation, not always the person, but the situation with some curiosity. Like, I want to learn more. I can still have my own feelings and emotions about, so I can be really angry about a thing, and I can still be angry about a thing or saddened by a thing and still want to learn more about that thing. I don't necessarily have to harden myself off and say, well, that's not what I believe, or that's not what my grandmother told me, or that's not what my best friend told me, or that's not what I want to believe. It's not that, uh, I'm going to choose which lens I want to use or look through, but it's about, well, what would happen if I chose a different lens? What would be my life experience if I chose this other lens? Or casting it at someone else, I don't know why someone said something to me in a certain tone. I don't know why someone, cut me off on the highway. I don't know why. I don't know why. Yes, it'll elicit then a response from me, yet there could be somebody having an emergent situation in that car in front of me. And so my empathy is about, thinking, where have I been in this particular situation? Where can I see myself in this situation? And that's when we get to the vulnerability side. If I can see myself in a space or having been part of a conversation or name it, then I owe it to myself to think about it and then to be vulnerable with myself. I don't have to be vulnerable with a whole platform of people. But what I do need to do is say, Londell, come on, what's really going on here? Let's sit around and think about what is happening, why we believe this, and is it true? What are the actual data elements? Everything else is judgment. Because of this data, I made this judgment. Because of this data experience, I made this judgment. And this is me being empathetic or growing into empathy and developing this personal vulnerability with myself of saying, okay, Londell, you're pretty harsh with this person. And this could be the reason why. How are we going to do this differently next time? I mean, there's an example that's coming up in my mind right now. Um, my husband and I, we were out walking around the lake. This was 5 or 6 years ago. And on this very popular lake, there's no designated bike lane. And so people just, in my judgment, sometimes have very bad bike etiquette.
Etiquette.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, after however many people had ridden past me, um, I someone else rode past us, and they merely just said, "Watch yourself." For whatever reason, hearing that triggered within me, and then seeing the person that was in front of me, then why don't you just go back home? And I'm not one for public confrontation. I'm just not. But I don't know
Wait, is
what.
that what you said? You said to the
That's what
person,
I
why don't you
said.
just go back home?
That's what I said. I said, just go
Okay.
back home. They stopped their bike, which isn't surprising. It just happened to be a black couple, which is important for this conversation or this example. And they're like, "What did you say? Why did you say that to me?" I was thinking, why don't you just go back home since you can't ride on a bicycle path and I'm all bitter? What they got is me with my white husband telling him to go back someplace that wasn't there.
Got it.
And they had to really explain to me, well, won't say it was really explaining. And so the gentleman and his wife, or I'm judging, assuming that was his wife, got back on their bicycle and just rode off. Before they got onto the bike, they called me a Trump loving N word, which
All of that came out of go home
all
because
that
that's
came,
what the
yes. And that's what they got from that.
wow.
So my lesson immediately, because I'm just kind of standing in fury, also embarrassment, because it's just this is really not me. I'm not this person to pick fights with people. And even if they do bother me on a bike trail, I'm just not this person. But nonetheless, I acted out. My husband says to me, "Well, it is odd that they were the only ones that you chose to say something to." I really then began to look at what was the emotional trigger that was going on with me. Why is it that I chose this couple to make a statement to and ignore the many other people who had committed the same infraction that weekend or that hour walking around the lake? I realized this was about me, not about them. The way I reacted, the way I said what I said was totally about me from past experiences of other people who may have looked like them, what I felt I was being treated as. And so, had I taken the watch yourself and not gone down this road of judgment, had I been more curious of, well, what does that mean? Or, well, I've heard that before. What I would have done differently is just stepped aside because the emotional intelligent part of this is realizing that I had been emotionally triggered by past events. I was not at all being curious about why these people were doing this or why they were on the path or why they said to excuse me or not to my satisfaction, I should say. The vulnerability was to have my husband tell me this to my face and for me to sit with it, not to get
Yeah.
into an argument with him about it,
Or
but
be
to sit.
immediately defensive and really
Yeah.
just
And so I fast forward that to today, where I no longer, and I promise you I've no longer done this to anybody else. I have realized that there are more things I contribute to the noise, the more I cast judgment on a subject, a person, on a place. And I'm not going to say that I can't have my feelings, but my feelings are not the responsibility of someone else.
mhm.
My emotions are not the responsibility of someone else. And when I'm in this empathetic space and when I'm being vulnerable with myself, I feel as though I am being a human being in the best place that I can be. Not perfect, but the
Right.
best place I can be. And so this is what I hear or what I feel is going on currently is there's just so much noise happening. There's so much judgment happening with what's being said that I judge people aren't listening or understanding where are their emotions coming from? What is the heart of all of this for them personally? And then how can we create a different discourse? How can we engage in conversation? We can have a debate, but
Yeah.
just simply screaming at one another in this time is not getting us anywhere. And so, how can I aid to the reduction of this noise?
Mm. Well, first of all, I agree with you, but I also think it's quite scary to sit with something that is your own, um, and face that. Like, remember earlier I said, like, sometimes we want to take the glasses off. Like, I don't want to
Yeah.
see that. Never ending story.
Yes, totally.
Okay. Do you remember when what's the kid's name? Atreyu?
Atreyu,
He
yes.
he has to go through the gates. There's like the first gate has like the angel looking things and they try to zap him with his eyes, right?
Yes.
With their eyes, right? And he makes it through,
Mhm.
whatever. And then there's another gate. But the third gate is him looking in the mirror.
Yes.
And that's like the most that's the most difficult challenge that he has to overcome. And I think about that. Like oftentimes what scares us is seeing ourselves. And if anybody who's into psychology or even into coaching and things like that, it's a very Jungian, very Carl Jung thing to talk about the shadow self
Mm.
and facing the dark side of us, which we don't have to turn from and we don't have to be afraid of because it's still us. It's just a side that we believe we should not have. And if we, like, what I love about what you explained, Lundell, is you talked about showing up with curiosity for others, but you are also curious about yourself when you said, where is this coming from? What is the thing actually? And I don't think many of us stop long enough to ask ourselves that question. Like, what actually is it inside of me that's making that a trigger in the
Mhm.
first place? None of us wants to feel like we have an ugly side
Right.
to us, but it's just part of being human. And we can always work on that so it's less ugly, but it is just being human. And if we can see the humanity in others, maybe we could come together and realize, in many ways, we are on the same page. And it doesn't mean we have to agree. And sometimes I think people's choices can be harmful to others. And so, like, I'm just not going to come to agreement with that. But we don't have to be ugly. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights. This has been really good. We've covered glasses, contacts. No, I'm just kidding. No, this has really been so good. And each one of these conversations I just find to be so valuable because every person, no matter how it is that we show up with our various identities, we all bring a different thing to the table. So this has been very valuable. Thank
Oh,
you.
my pleasure. And thank you very much as well.
Is there anything that you want to share in terms of having folks reach out to you or to find you, perhaps where to get your book and so on?
Certainly. Please do visit betweentheopposites.com, where you can find out more about the book and order a copy of your own. You're also welcome to, by way of that page, send me a message yourself if there's something that comes up for you, or if you want to have another conversation such as this, by all means, that'd be the best way to get in touch with me.
Thank you. I hope that we get to talk again. This was amazing.
Yes, likewise.
All right. Take care of yourself. Be safe out
Farewell,
there.
you too. Take
All
care.
right.